I'm a big fan of your work, and I love collaborating with women who hold the same heart as me, and that is to see the world better. Taken away my innocence, let's just say that. I'm a big believer in our bodies are designed to heal, and we can heal anything if we apply our mind to it. Do things. I didn't know how to sit at a table. I wouldn't have known how to be polite to you if I came to your home for dinner, because none of that was ever taught to me. I can't remember sitting down to dinner with my family ever. I did everything in excess to try and fill a void. So I was addicted to shopping. I couldn't stop shopping. And so I never went down the medication road because I felt that it was probably going to end really disastrously for me. Jane or many of the other women in the world that are doing the work that we're doing, and have a chat, because what you'll find is this: if you have the courage to step up and back yourself, I promise you that in the work you will do, while it will be hard for you, it will be a lot easier to live.
Welcome to the Unfiltered Minds podcast, the only culturally diverse podcast where we discuss ways to destigmatize mental health, as well as promote self-seeking behaviors amongst our youth and family members struggling with ADHD or depression. Now, here's your host, Jane Levy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unfiltered Mind podcast. This is the platform where we discuss ways to destigmatize mental health, as well as promote self-help-seeking behaviors amongst our youth and their family member. Today, we have our guest speaker, Tracy. A little bit about Tracy. Tracy is a Global Award-winning international guest speaker. She's a life coach. She's a mentor as well. Author of The Unhappy Smile. Tracy believes coaching is unlock a person's potential to maximize their own performance. Tracy has a long history of working with women and empowering them to be their best version of themselves. Tracy, welcome. We are pleased to have you here. Would you please introduce yourself to our guest and we can kick this off?
Yeah, thank you, Jane. What a pleasure to be with you. I'm a big fan of your work, and I love collaborating with women who hold the same heart as me, and that is to see the world better, to see the place better, to see people functioning better. So my story was that I was born into a home of a schizophrenic father with 5 personalities and a drunk mum, which resulted in DV and sexual abuse. And by the time I was 14, 13 men had taken away my innocence, let's just say that. So by the time I was 18, I was told I would never be able to contribute to society and they needed to medicate me, and I turned that down. And I went looking, Jane, to see what it was that I hadn't learned as a child. Our home was very, very disruptive. It was nothing like anybody else's. And in my book, I say the only time I saw normal in my childhood was on the washing machine as a setting. And so what I discovered along the way was that humans want to be whole. We want to be whole. We desire that. And when something's missing in our lives, we're very, very good at treasure hunting why and how to find the answers. And so I found some answers and I applied them to my life. And I now say that I had a very rough start, but a fantastic life. And when my daughters, I've got 4 daughters that I had just under 5 years apart, and when they started to bring their girlfriends home from school in their late teens, I began to realize that, Jane, unfortunately, I was no longer the exception to the rule. A lot of young women now hold a story similar to mine. And there's a lot of trauma around the world. There's a lot of trauma in young people, a lot of depression and anxiety, which is my 2 things I work very hard at demystifying and equipping people to cope with and to be able to heal from. I'm a big believer in our bodies are designed to heal, and we can heal anything if we apply our mind to it. And so I wrote a book and just began to travel internationally. I won a couple of awards, but I think the top thing for me was that I was able to spread my voice internationally and teach people that your life is yours and you can have it as great as you want.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Tracy. I did recall reading one of, I think it was one of the, you were a guest speaker at an event. I'm not sure where was that. And people were thanking you for changing their lives at one of your speaking event overseas. And I remember you mentioning that you did not change their lives. You just create the space and kindness and grace for them to be able to do that. And I want to just say thank you for creating that space, that safe space, so women and all over can come around and just be able to express themselves.
Thanks, Jane. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Do you remember that speaking event?
Yeah, I
Do you know
do.
where was
I do,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. So growing up, of course, you grew up in domestic violence and the sexual abuse. And how did that affect your mental health in general?
Well, when we're under 10 years of age and trauma happens to us, as children, we have this thing called perception and not reception. So as adults, if I was to be rude to you today, you have a particular ability within your brain to receive that whichever way you choose. So if I was to say, listen, I don't like your hair, or I don't like the background that you've got in your office, you can make that really clear decision about whether that's true or false for you and whether you want to live with it. But under 10, children don't. They perceive. So all children that are abused, myself included, we believe we're the problem. So I grew up thinking I was a child of no value and no worth. I grew up thinking, nobody could love me, nobody needed me, everybody just used me and discarded me. We didn't eat properly. We didn't function properly. My dad beat us on the daily. I was abused. Everything that went on just led me to believe, you know what? I don't think I really matter. I don't think anything's possible for me. I don't think anybody would ever care.
I can only imagine. Now, when you mentioned that, were there family members around, like when things were like the abuse were going on in the home, were you able to confide in anyone outside of the home or in the home to just let them know this was going on?
I was living in New Zealand, so we only had my mum's Polynesian family around, and the Polynesian culture is very accepting, but it's non-invasive. So you can't talk about your elders, you can't talk about your parents. They're very, very encompassing. And once my grandmother knew what was happening, she did step in and helped a little bit. But they don't, our culture is that we live and let live, and that if it is happening in the home, it gets dealt with in the home. So I didn't really have any support.
It's not like here again, I came from that culture where what happens in the house stays in the house. And also what happens in this house, when it stays in the house, that means you don't even have access to mental health services like counseling or therapy. That's being like you disgrace in the family.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that what it was like? It was like,
Yeah, and I'm nearly 60, so it was way back in the early 60s this was happening. So there was nobody for me to talk to. The schools weren't equipped by that in those days, nobody. So I just kept really quiet.
wow. So when you got diagnosed, right, with mental health, how did you initiate that process? What age were you when you decided to say, you know what, I'm going to seek help?
I was 18 years of age, and I was at work, and my boss caught me drinking in my office and sat me down and said, Tracy, what are you doing? And I said, drying out from last night, sort of thinking it would be funny, and it wasn't. And so he sent me to a psychologist, and I told the psychologist my story for the first time ever. And I'll never forget, Jane, he'd made notes and he put it down and he said to me, people don't get over your story, Tracy. We'll need to medicate you. I don't expect you to contribute to society, and you'll probably be dead by 30. Was the biggest wake-up call I've ever had in my life.
Wow. Research have also shown that a lot of kids who dealt with abuse, they usually really turn into a coping mechanism, substance abuse. And that's, in your case, that's really like a way of escape for you.
Yes, definitely. Most definitely. And I think too, when you grow up in a childhood where there's no boundaries except poor ones, you don't know how to be human. I didn't know how to do things. I didn't know how to sit at a table. I wouldn't have known how to be polite to you if I came to your home for dinner, because none of that was ever taught to me. I can't remember sitting down to dinner with my family ever. Mum and Dad were out drinking by 4:00 in the afternoon. They were home partying by 10:30. That was when I would be taken out of bed and things would occur. And the next day they would sleep while I went to school with no food. Just that whole really perpetual cycle.
Wow. I can only imagine that as a child. But Look at you today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
look
you.
at you, and you were doing great work. So let's talk about your book for a minute. I
Yep.
haven't really had the chance to really get a deep dive or read the entire book. What is the book about?
So the book, The Unhappy Smile, is based on what I've learned on how to get healed. And it's based on the prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. So the first 3 chapters, I talk about your personality, your nature, your giftings, your nurture, because you can't change any of that. And if you've suffered from mental health or you've been really abused, the first thing you want to do is change so people don't hurt you anymore, but you can't. So coming to terms with all that is really powerful for people. And then the wisdom to be able to deal with what we need to. So I talk about grief and shame and blame and forgiveness and hurt and loss and rejection and pain and all the things we can actually deal with. And, for me, the book came about because these girls started disclosing in my house. They'd be helping me with the dishes and stuff, and they started to disclose. And the thing about the book is the last chapter I talk about the key that really transformed my life. And that was when I was about 30 years of age, and I came face to face with one of the men that had abused me. And Jane, it blew my mind because he approached me like we were friends, and he approached me happily. And I just went almost catatonic. I just froze on sight. And he was like, Tracy, I haven't seen you for so long. And he actually went to touch me, and all I could do was put my hand out. And he sort of got a bit abrupt, and other people were there, so he kind of walked off. But at that moment, I had the epiphany that changed my life. I realized this. Whatever happens to us is irrelevant. It's what we own to it. It's what we dedicate to it. It's what we believe about it. And at that moment, I realized that all the people that had hurt me were just living life. And I had designated all of my life to their hurt and carrying it. So that day I decided and created the saying, I will never let somebody else write my story ever again.
And you telling your story. And I remember watching a documentary of Michelle Obama when the girls were asking her, how can they be of a service to the community? She said, share your story. Your story, it's what makes you unique.
Absolutely.
It's authentic. It's real.
Yeah.
And you're doing that. And the book, the reason why I mentioned the book, at the Golden Globes 2008, your book was a giveaway in the Amy Swag bags, right?
Yes, it was. Yep.
It was. And Lady Gaga got a copy.
Yep.
Bradley Cooper had a copy. Morgan Freeman. And how did that make you feel?
I'd worked with a couple of celebrities back here in Australia, and I'd realised something. I'd realised that when you have a very big persona, it's often hard to unravel and deal with stuff. So the reason I put the book in those bags was so that they had the resource to be able to read this and to be able to do some work without being on centre stage, without falling down or having to do it publicly. So I was really pleased. It went in 2 years in a row. It was so popular in 18, they put it back in 19. So it was funny because the other night the girls were here with their children watching Game of Thrones, and I heard one of them say, all the Lannisters have Nana's book. And my grandson was like, wow, that's so cool.
It's amazing to actually see that. Congratulations on that, Tracy.
Thank you.
You talk about forgiveness.
Yep.
A lot. And the reason why we have to, as humans, forgive each other is, like you said, when you hold a grudge with someone, the person is out there living their lives, and then you are the prisoner because you're so mad, you're so upset, you still have the reflection, of course, and they're living their lives. What would you tell someone who is still holding that grudge to let go, and just how would you teach them forgiveness?
Okay, so in my book, I say this one statement. Forgiveness is the gift you give yourself. The first thing I teach people to do is to detach from the fact that we always think if we give forgiveness, it should be earned or it should be needed. But we're giving it for us. We're releasing our side of that really ugly soul tie. It's not about the other person. Those men to this day I haven't had any restitution with any of them, and I don't want it. I don't know what they're doing. I hope they haven't gone on to hurt anyone else. But for me, it was about me actually just releasing them. So, with forgiveness, we have this big thing where we believe it's got to end up in this really deep, emotional sort of moment where everybody's reconciled and everything's fine. But a lot of the times that can't happen. Sometimes within families, and I call that the greatest forgiveness, is when it's unconditional forgiveness, because we have this deep, loving relationship that allows us to forgive everything. And I have that with my husband and my children, and that's different to the one I'm talking about now. I'm talking about for choosing to forgive what happened to you, realizing that it was a gift given to you that you somehow now have to make part of your dance and have to make it beautiful. Because I can tell you something, Jane, everything that has happened to me has made me into the human I am today. And I believe I'm way more beautiful because of it, because I've enabled to make it my dance, I've enabled to make it my truth, and I've enabled it to be part of what I now share to others.
It's a wonderful story. Let's talk about treatment, group therapy, individual therapy at that time.
Yeah, I never went on any medications because at the time I identified I had quite an addictive personality. I did everything in excess to try and fill a void. So I was addicted to shopping. I couldn't stop shopping. I overate. I overdrank. I did everything in excess. And so I never went down the medication road because I felt that it was probably going to end really disastrously for me. But what I did do was I found a really great counsellor, and they were really lovely with me in the way that they structured my treatment. So we would pick one thing because I honestly, it was like I was carrying in this little trailer load of all things. Name something that people feel, and I had it. I had PTSD, I had depression, I had anxiety, I had hatred at the deepest level, I had shame, I had guilt, I had fear, I had rejection, I had hurt, I had physical hurt in my body from being abused. I had it all. And so what we would do is she would ask me a few questions that were very strategic, and we'd pick on one thing. And so shame was the first thing we dealt with. And we'd work together for 6 weeks on shame, and then she would send me off for 2 months to just enjoy being in the strength of what I'd learnt, and then I'd go back. And we did that for about 2 years, and it was really, really good for me. And I learnt a lot from that.
So that was the individual therapy, is that correct?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
But it took 2 years.
Yep. And I did a couple of group things afterwards, after I married my husband. So I did all that when I was 18, 19, 20, and then I married Paul at 22, and we had our first daughter, and some stuff came up again, and that was when I started to do some group work.
Wonderful, wonderful. You did mention about therapy. I know you do a lot of work with women. When do you think women should consider going to therapy? Because let me give you an example of the reason why I asked that. I had come from a background where we believe the only time you go seek therapy or therapist, it's when something is wrong.
Right. Yeah. And that is the culture of the world, is it not? Wait till it's broken.
Yeah.
I say this when people come to me and say, listen, I'm thinking of coming to see you, but I'm not sort of sure. And I talk to them. I always say this: when something is nagging at you or it's a recurring thought, then you need to address it. And it's better to address it then than when you're in crisis. Because if we wait till it needs to be fixed, most of the time, Jane, because we live in this heavy world that is full of other stuff people are processing, women have gone into crisis. And women are designed naturally to carry children, as you and I both know. So what I find is that they have this innate ability to carry hurt. Naturally. And they have this innate ability to carry stuff so that nobody else gets affected. So I always say to the women that I teach and educate, if you deal with your stuff on the daily, if you deal with your stuff as a preventative, nobody would ever need to be affected. And that's normally how they come to me.
So you just mentioned the word preventive measures, right?
Yeah.
You put those preventive measures in place, and so that way you educate yourself in case something happened. You know what to do. You have, like, your book would be one of those resources. With that said, what resources or tools do you actually use in your program, a coaching program for women?
Okay, so I have a fundamental course that is about dealing with hurt. And then I have several other courses, but the fundamental course about dealing with hurt, the things I put in place is this: for the 6 weeks that they process that, they have access to me, a lot of access to me, because I believe in support. I believe, and one of the things that helped me the most was being able to look face to face into the eyes of a woman that actually cared. And to have that reiterated, and to realize that when I rejected her, when I acted out in my sessions, when I misbehaved, when I showed up late, when I showed up half drunk, she looked past all of that and called out the genuine woman behind that. And so I operate on that. I also operate on a process of, because I believe this, I believe nobody wants to be unwell. I don't believe anybody wants to be in crisis. I don't believe anybody doesn't want to live their best life. But some people can't get there because of trauma or because of some things that have happened. I have an autistic grandson who often says to me, Nana, I can't right now. My brain won't answer your question. And so I always say to him, that's okay, Dom, just stop thinking about it. I just take the pressure right off. So I'm a big believer in giving people that really holistic, happy, relaxed space so they can process it in their own time and space.
Definitely. I agree with that. A holistic approach is really what I also strive for. And I do believe that teaching somebody life skills.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, taking great care of yourself, eating healthy, and just self-care is I see you promote that a lot. You talk about that a lot in your speech. So I wanted to bring that up. Thank you so much. And moving along, what habits or structure do you currently have in place? I know you're a busy woman, you travel a lot. Do you have in place to care for your mental health?
Jane, I don't know what people believe about creation or whether there's a God or it's all on the angels or whatever, but I often say that after a really tough childhood, one of the gifts I got in life was my husband, who is a very stable, gentle, loving man that met me and fell in love for no rhyme or reason. It didn't make any sense. He comes from the exact opposite life to I do. So for me, one of the things I have in place is I have a very open relationship with him. I talk everything out with him, and I make sure that I'm really accountable to him. I also have my own personal development coach that works with the spirit, soul, and body, and I work with her 12 weeks out of every year. I make sure I structure a lot of holidays around all the busyness of what I do. And then the best thing I find I can do for me is to spend time at the beach meditating. That really works for me. And I'm very fortunate to live 4 houses from the beach. So I get to do that most days.
Oh, that's amazing.
It is. It's a gift.
Yes. So Tracy, you speak a lot of life into women, children, and somebody's watching this who has been abused and don't have the platform to come forward and speak about things like this. What's words of encouragement you can give to somebody who is struggling, just to say, okay, the abuser might be their dad, the abuser might be somebody in the home, but they're just scared to speak up. What are some words of encouragement you can offer them?
The first thing I want to tell you is it's not over. That's part of the story. But your whole story is a book, and there are thousands of chapters left that are unwritten. My advice to you is that you talk to somebody. You reach out to myself, Jane, or many of the other women in the world that are doing the work that we're doing, and have a chat, because what you'll find is this: if you have the courage to step up and back yourself, I promise you that in the work you will do, while it will be hard for you, it will be a lot easier to live. I spent 19 years of my life living in deep trauma. I spent probably another 10 after that living with the trauma as it healed. I can tell you now that my life is completely different with not holding that trauma. And yes, it was hard. There were nights, forgiveness, we talked about that today. It's not as easy as it sounds. You and I and Jane all know that. But having the strength to process it is a short-term pain instead of having to live with long-term pain. Because women that live with long-term pain that have been really hurt, your body will give out in certain ways. especially they're showing signs that women who never deal with their sexual abuse or DV trauma are going through menopause and almost dying because the body can't hold all of the energy. So my suggestion is this. If you believe that you have any value, do the work. If you don't believe you have any value, do the work quicker.
Can you repeat that? That's strong. I like that. Can you repeat that again?
Yeah. If you believe you have any value, then do the work. If you don't believe you have any value, do the work quicker.
Well said. Thank you, Tracy. So for you, it took somebody at work to recognize that your drinking pattern and to talk to you about seeking help. What can friends or loved ones do to support someone who is struggling mentally?
If you see somebody struggling, the best thing you can do is confront it in a loving way. Confront it in kindness. And we had this personally happen to us because I had a niece, and she ended up taking drugs. She met this guy. She had a lot of issues in herself from some abuse, and I kept trying to get to her, and I kept holding on to her and talking to her. And nearly a year ago now, she took her life, and it was another wake-up call to me again about the importance of just checking in with people and keeping it real. Because I think if you see somebody who's really struggling, keep it real. You don't have to be judgmental, harsh, or nasty. You just have to keep it real. Hey, I can see you're not doing your best, Tracy, and I just want to know, are you ready to deal with this? Is there something more I could do? Is there something you need to talk about? Would you like me to give you Jane or Tracy's number? Would you like me to contact them for you? You know, there's just have the conversations. And I think sometimes we get afraid of having those because the people that are deeply hurt and are acting out are normally quite strong about it because they don't want us to have those conversations. They don't want us to get vulnerable. But I think it's really important that we do, because the side effect of missing that is that I live in a country with the highest suicide rate in the world, a first world country where 99% of the people in Australia are living way above the poverty line of the world. We have no issues financially. We can get to a beach if we want to. We have fantastic weather, and we have the largest suicide rate in the world, Jane. Seriously, breaks my heart.
Yeah, I see that. It does. And you are a true example of just amazing things, from a child victim sexual abuse to now a successful international speaker. You mentor women in your space, and I think this is amazing. Your story is amazing, and I really hope our viewers and our listeners that are watching today can resonate with your story and just give them some hope, because the goal here, Tracy, is really to come together and build a community of support. We want people to strive to be the best version of themselves.
For sure.
And then we would like to thank you. That was the last questions. I would like to thank you. Is there anything you would like to add?
I just want to say I'm not special. I'm really not. I'm not different. And I emphasize this all the time. I was as broken and as worn out as a human could be. So if I can do this, you can do this. I promise you, if you find the right people, as Jane said in her collaboration of people, if you work with people of our caliber, you can, I promise you 100%, you can be free.
How can they get in contact with, if somebody wants to get the book, The Unhappy Smile, or try to reach you, how can they reach you, Tracy?
Well, obviously they can find me all over Facebook, as we can find each other, but the easiest way to do it is on my website, www.tracy with an E, Horton, Horton, international, all one word, .com. And if you pop a message in there, I have staff that work for me, and that is watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the minute you send me a message or you buy the book and send a message, then you will get it. Now, this book, every copy that's bought, a copy is given to a at-risk youth or somebody who's in need, and it's given in the name of the person that buys it. So it is absolutely transforming the world.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Tracy. And to our guests, we want to say thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on another episode.
Thank you for listening to Unfiltered Minds podcast, the If you love what you're learning on our podcast, we ask that you please join the Unfiltered Minds community by subscribing and sharing our podcast on YouTube, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Our dedicated team of ADHD coaches are committed to making a positive impact on the lives of our listeners. Through our thought-provoking podcast, we offer valuable resources, PBT training for ADHD, and a supportive community that understands the journey of mental health challenges. Also, you can visit our website at theunfilteredminds.com, where you can sign up to be a guest on our podcast, as well as sign up for our 8-week parent behavior training course on ADHD.